one thing that has really loomed on the horizon is this carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM, as it's called, CBAM. And basically, the CBAM's origin is in the European Union, where the European Union feels that since they have a fairly robust system of pricing carbon, and the price of CO2 emissions is fairly high, like I mentioned, countries that are exporting into the EU are getting an unfair advantage. So, for example, if there's a steel producer, let's say India, which produces steel and exports it to the EU or countries such as Indonesia and so on, China, for example, who are not pricing carbon in their own country or not pricing it at the same level are getting an unfair advantage. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism is exactly what it says. It's an adjustment at the EU border. So, for example, if my CO2 is priced at 20 euros per ton of CO2 and the EU price is 80, then I am going to charge that extra 60 so that we have a level playing field. What is really not understood is that you can always look at this as a threat, as a trade barrier, and countries in our part of the world are quite upset about it. I have a slightly more heterodox position on this. I believe that the carbon border adjustment mechanism is a kind of an incentive for us to start pricing carbon in our own countries. And there are obviously problems with carbon pricing in terms of their impacts on, equity and distribution, but we can talk about that at another time. So, for example, if the CBAM is coming into Indonesia, it's also a incentive for Indonesia to start pricing its CO2, obviously not at the very high levels of the EU, but moving in that direction, which also gives space for negotiation for countries that saying, okay, you're going to put a tax on us because we are having either a zero or a very low price on CO2. You have a very high price, but we are moving in this direction. So it's an opportunity. I think the mistake that countries in our region are making is that we are simply thinking of this as a threat and doubling down on it and saying that it's a protectionist measure. I personally may be a little bit an outlier on this, but I do believe that the genesis of the CBAM is not in trade protectionism. It's about the Europeans being very serious about pricing their own carbon.
That's a very good answer, Shreekant. I think this is really helpful for people to have an understanding of it, because right now, CBAM has always been seen as a tool against developing countries rather than really an environmental tool to reduce emissions. And especially because they're targeting the four sectors CBAM is targeting is primarily located in developing countries. And which is why also attracting the question, who is CBAM designed for and what is really the true purpose? But this explanation is very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Well, Victor, I'm in ground zero. I'm in India, and it's almost like a nationalistic thing that, oh, these guys are malified and they're out to, pardon my language, they're out to screw us.
Mhm.
Well, de facto, that makes situation, but in principle, that's not, they didn't wake up one morning. They're serious about pricing. And this is something that we can pick up in another conversation is there is this notion called AITE, which is emissions intensive and trade exposed. So right now, what is happening in the EU is that their players, their dirty industries, there is a section of their industries which are dirty and exposed to trade, are exempt from the EU ETS. So those guys are getting a free pass. The AITE, this is a standard jargon, emissions intensive and trade exposed. So there's a lot of trade, say in steel or aluminum, and they're very dirty. So right now, those firms are being given free allowances in the EU ETS or just being kept out of it. Now they're saying we're going to bring you guys into our ETS. We want our ETS to be comprehensive. But then there is this problem of Indian steel. Let me just talk about India. The Indian steel coming in, which is dirtier. And ironically, Indians are producing steel in two places. Mittal is producing steel in the EU, and then they're also producing in India, right? So the whole idea is that Indian steel is coming in. Indians, let's say, are pricing their CO2 as zero, and Europeans are pricing it at 80 euros. Now, come on, that's so So now what is the message I can take? I can either take it as a threat, a challenge, fight it all the way to the WTO, where we are saying, well, this is a protectionist measure. The Europeans are saying, no, this is not protectionist. This is for our environment. And we can do it. And the WTO, as we all know, is dead because of all that's happening. Or the Indians can say, okay, we have an Indian carbon market. We are moving in that direction. We may not obviously price it at 80, but we're moving in that direction. So guys, give us a window where we can, breathing space where we can come in. So that's a constructive way of doing it. And to be very serious, I presented this view to the Confederation of Indian Industry. And I told them, look, this is the way you guys should think about it. And they're actually doing it. So the Indian carbon market, which is an emissions intensity market, is not even looking at the power sector, which is very counterintuitive because saying that the first thing you must do in carbon trading is look at the coal base. The Indians are bringing it in for steel, for aluminum, for the ones that we are selling to the EU. So we are really doing it. And that I think is the way we must think about it, because the other ways of thinking about it are counterproductive and are not going to get us anywhere.